In this video, I'm going to show you how to profile your digital camera using the Sekonic light meters that have that functionality built in. Currently, there's 3 Sekonic meters that you can profile digital cameras with: the L-758, the L-858, and the L-478. I'm going to be using the L-758, which is one of the older models, but that's the one that I'm using. And the procedure is the same for all of them, so even if you're using the newer 858, it should work the same. You're going to need several things to get started to do this. You're going to need, of course, your light meter and the camera that you want to profile, and you're going to need the Sekonic exposure profiling target too. There's a profiling target 1 that's no longer made. The target 2 is the current version, and that's the one you want. It works better than the older one. You can also use, if you don't want to buy the Sekonic target, it's expensive, it's about $130. You can use the X-Rite color checker, or you can use the spider checker, which is a very similar color chart that's made by the company that makes the spider monitor calibrators, Data Vision or Data Color. My experience, I haven't used the spider checker, but I have tried this with the X-Rite color checker, and my experience is the profiles it produces aren't very accurate. You're better off using the Sekonic profile target, even though it's very expensive, and I think that it sucks that we have to pay $130 for something like that should have come with these light meters, especially considering the cost of them. The new L858 is a $600 light meter. My 758 cost even more than that when it was new. They've actually lowered the price a little on the newer model that replaced it, but still, $600 is a very expensive light meter. The very least they could do, I think, is include that piece of cardboard that has those little gray squares all over it that we photographed to make the profiles, but they didn't. And if you want to do the profiles, you got to buy the thing, and it is worth it because the profiles are very useful. Now, doing the profiling does 2 things. One is it tells you what the dynamic range of your camera is, so that you know how bright of things that you can include in the picture without losing highlight detail, and how dark of the tones can be that you can include without losing shadow detail. But the other thing that it does is that it corrects for inaccuracies in the ISO settings on your camera. At least in theory, if you set your camera to a certain ISO setting, let's say ISO 200, because that's the base ISO for a lot of cameras made today. Let's say you set your camera at ISO 200 and you set your light meter at 200, assuming the light meter is calibrated correctly, you should get perfect exposure. Well, it doesn't always work that way because some of the camera manufacturers are not very accurate in their ISO settings. I used to use a Canon 5D Mark II, which was very good. I could set the Canon at any of the ISO settings that the camera offered, and I could set the same ISO setting on a handheld meter, and I would get perfect exposure. I'm currently using Olympus Micro Four Thirds equipment, and I switched from the Canon to that because I have a lot of serious health problems, and it's difficult for me to carry very heavy equipment. And the 5D Mark II is a big, heavy camera, and the lenses for it are big and heavy. And the Olympus Pen F and the OMD EM1 Mark II that I'm shooting with now are both nice and small and light. Unfortunately, the ISO settings on them are rather optimistic. I've seen this consistently with both camera bodies. If you shoot at the base ISO on these cameras is 200. Let's say you set the camera at 200 and you set the meter at 200. The pictures are going to be underexposed about half a stop. And the profiling takes care of that, because if you profile your camera, if the ISO settings on it are not accurate, the camera automatically builds that compensation into the profile, so you can set the camera at 200, set the meter at 200, and your exposures will be perfect. You won't have to remember in your head, oh wait, I need to add half a stop of exposure to what the meter says, because the meter's going to do it for you. And the meter can store profiles for multiple cameras, so if you have one camera whose ISO settings are inaccurate, like my Olympus cameras, and then you have another camera like the Canon whose settings are accurate, you can switch on the meter back and forth between the profiles when you switch back and forth between cameras you own. And so in the demonstration today, I'm going to do this on the OMD EM1 Mark II, because I just bought this camera a few weeks ago and I haven't profiled it yet. I've been using the profile for the Pen F, which has actually been pretty close, but I've been wanting to do it for this camera too, to have a more specific profile for it, so that's the one we're going to use. You can use different types of light sources to do these profiles. You can use studio lights if you want, if you've got hot lights or some other kind of studio lights, studio flashes. There's actually a flash mode if you want to profile it for flash separately from ambient light. I'm using daylight for my example here because I mostly shoot under daylight since I do a lot of social documentary work. And I found in the past that the profiles I produce under daylight also work really well if I use my studio strobes for the little bit of studio work I do. And so that's what we're going to do because it's just easier than setting up all that equipment. So let's head outside and I'll show you the setup I'm going to use out there. Alright, here's my outdoor setting where I'm going to take the pictures. I've got the profile target hanging in the shade on the side of my house. I'm lowering the dome on the incident light meter, and the reason I'm doing that is because we need to first check and make sure that the light is perfectly even over the target, and the dome has to be in the down position to do that. And after we've got it lowered, we're going to take a reading at each of the four corners of the target, and then one at the center, each time with the meter pointing back at the camera. And we will then look at the readings and see if the readings are the same, because all four corners and the center all need to read exactly the same. Even if they're a tenth of a stop off, it could throw off the profile. And so if the lighting is not perfectly even, you need to move the profile target to a different location. Or if you're using studio lights, you need to adjust the lights to make sure that the lighting is even over it. Once we're satisfied the lighting is even, we raise the dome back up and take an incident reading from the center of the target. And you see I'm reaching out away from me to make sure that I don't cast a shadow from my body on the dome. Now after we've taken the incident light reading, I need to write down the settings that it gave. And we're doing the first set of them here at ISO 200. And I'm going to write down the aperture and shutter speed that the meter recommended. I'm then going to take another reading using the spot meter, and that reading is going to be taken from the big rectangle in the center of the profiling target, which is the 18% gray square. It's a larger rectangle than the other ones. And after I take that reading, I'm also going to write it down. And it may not be exactly the same as the one from the incident meter reading, which is okay. We just need to write down both of them so we know what the settings that the meter recommended are, because we're going to need that information later when we make the profile. Now after I've taken both sets of readings and written down the results, I then set the camera to ISO 200 and I set the aperture and shutter speed that was recommended by the incident light meter. We're not going to use the setting from the reflected light meter right now. That's going to be used in the software later to create the profile. The camera setting is going to be based on the incident reading. I'm going to then take a picture of the profiling target using the incident reading, and then I'm also going to shoot another picture 3 stops overexposed from that and one 3 stops underexposed from that. So we'll have a set of 3 photographs done at ISO 200. Once I have those pictures done, then I will repeat the process at the other ISO settings that I'm going to do for my profiles. I'm going to do ISO 800, 1600, and 3200 also, because those are settings I frequently use. And they're going to be done the same way. I'm going to set the camera to the ISO speed that we're testing. I'm going to set the meter to that ISO speed. I'm going to take an incident reading and a reflected reading and write them down, and then set the camera to the incident reading. Do 1 normal exposure, 1 3 stops over, and 1 3 stops under. And we'll just repeat that so that we have that for all of the ISO settings I'm going to test. And as I said, we're going to do it 200, 800, 1600, and 3200. I'm skipping 400 because I don't typically use that one very often. If you do, you could do that as well for yours. Now after I do the set of pictures, I went ahead and took another reading of the target just to be sure that the light had not changed on me, because I'm working outdoors. You know, the sun can go behind a cloud in the middle of me shooting the sequence and that will throw everything off. So we need to make sure that the light had stayed the same from the beginning to the end. If it didn't, we need to start over. Okay, now it's time to make the profile. I shot these pictures as RAW files. You can do this with JPEGs also, and my recommendation would be to use whatever type of file you normally do. If you're a JPEG shooter and you never shoot RAW, then you should have shot the profile target pictures as JPEGs. If you're someone who only shoots RAW like I do, then you should shoot them as RAW files and then process them the way that you normally would process your files. I use Lightroom, and I just processed them with the default settings that I normally use as my starting points. I didn't mess with the exposure settings or the highlight and shadow compensation or the contrast or any of that stuff, because you don't want any of that stuff done to the files that we're using to make these profiles. You want them to be pretty much default settings, and then That way you'll get the most accurate profile of what you're going to get out of the camera before you do any post-processing. So I'm not going to show you the stuff that I did in Lightroom because that's pretty mundane stuff. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into the Sekonic data transfer software, which is the software that creates the profiles and transfers them to the light meter. I saved the pictures out of Lightroom as TIFF files. You can use TIFF files or JPEGs, either one will work. When you open up the Sekonic data transfer software, if you've already made any profiles, and you probably haven't since you're watching this video to learn how, but if you have any, they're going to be listed here. One you will see listed even if you've never created one is Camera Default. Camera Default is Sekonic's default calibration. So that's how the meter comes from the factory. So you can always restore your meter back to factory original settings if you decide to do so, because that profile is always going to be there. Now we're going to create a new profile, and we're going to click this button here to do that. And you have three choices. Quick mode only lets you do a profile for a single ISO setting, so we're not going to do that because I want my profile to work for different ISO settings. Because like I said, we photographed the profile target at 200, 800, 1600, and 3200. So we want to do a profile that can encompass all of those settings. And the advanced mode lets you do that. So that's what we're going to do. First thing it asks you is exposure range scale, normal or extended mode. Choose normal. The extended mode, you shoot more pictures of the profile target. I believe you do 5 shots of it instead of 3 for each ISO. I've tested that in the past and I found that it wasn't any better than the normal mode. Just a lot more work. So we're going to do the normal mode. You're going to choose which profile target you used. We're going to use the Sekonic Exposure Profile Target 2. As I said before, the X-Rite color checker really doesn't work that well. The Exposure Profile Target here is an older Sekonic profile target that they no longer manufacture. The newer one is supposed to be more accurate, and if you're going to buy a new one, that's the only one that should be available anyway. If you see the older one for sale somewhere, don't buy it, get the new one. So we'll check that. Click Next. You can choose between doing an ambient light profile, which is what we're doing today, or a flash profile. Flash profiles are done the same way, it's just that you're going to be using your studio strobes to make the example pictures instead of using daylight. But we're choosing ambient right now. Click Next. Okay, now we're at the place where we need those settings that we wrote down from the light meter when we were doing the profile pictures, or the profile target pictures. So I got my piece of paper here, and it's going to ask you what ISO sensitivity that you used. So we're going to start with the 200 one. Set that here. It's going to ask you for the settings that were used for the incident and the settings used for reflected. We'll start with incident. I shot them at 1/125th of a second, which is already set here. The aperture I used was f8 and 3/10 of a stop. Because remember, these meters can read to 1/10 of a stop, so it'll say like f8 and then 0.3, which is the 3/10 of a stop. So you need to make sure that that's in there. The reflected light reading that was done with the spot meter, it was also 1/125th at f8.3. So I'll go ahead and set those same numbers here. Then hit Next. Now it's going to ask us to find the folder that I saved all the pictures in. All the profile target pictures should be saved in a single folder when you save them from Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever editing software you use. Or if you shot JPEGs, whatever folder you imported them onto the computer into. And this is the folder. I already had it saved from when I was playing with this earlier, planning out this video. So choose the folder. You don't need to choose individual files. You just choose the folder and it'll bring them all in. Click Open. Okay, all the pictures are going to show up down here. And what we're going to do is we're going to start out with the 3 that were done for the ISO 200 setting, and that would be the first 3. And I'm going to put a checkbox in the corner of each of those 3. And then I'm going to click Next. And it's going to show the 3 that I selected. Click on the first one. And it's going to come up here with a bigger version, and you're going to see these little green crosses in each corner. And what you want to do is grab the cross and line it up as closely as possible with the white cross that's on the target. These are already pretty close, but let's see if we can fine tune it a little better. Okay, once you've done that, go to the next picture and repeat. And if you used a tripod like you're supposed to do to shoot these, the profile target won't have moved between exposures, so you probably won't really have to adjust the position of the cross as much, if at all. And go to the next one. And actually, they're pretty perfect on this one, so we're all set. Click Next. And it's going to create it's basically creating a tone curve and a profile for that ISO setting, and you'll see it right here. And the fact that the lines are kind of disjointed like this, that's pretty normal. You don't need to worry about that. It'll be an accurate profile anyway. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to click Add ISO Light Source so we can add the next ISO setting we've done. Basically, we're going to repeat everything I just did for the other three ISO settings. And then once we've done that for all 4 ISO settings that I've done, then we will click the Save button, and that will create the final profile. So let's go ahead and do this. Everything's the same as before, ambient. Choose the ISO setting, which our next one was 800. Put in the settings that we had written down, which for the 800 was 1/250th at f11.3. And the spot reading on this one was 1/250th at f11.4. Sometimes they're a little different from each other. Click Next. It's going to ask you to choose the folder again. It's the same folder, so just click Open. Choose the next 3 pictures, which would be the ones that were shot at ISO 800. Click Next. Do the same thing with the lining up the crosses, just like we did before. Probably won't have to do too much of changing with them. Oh, that one's perfect. Next, the third one. Okay, click Next again. It's going to do another tone curve for the ISO 800. Click Add ISO Light Source again. It's ambient again. New ISO setting is 1600 this time. This time it was 1/500th at f8.7. Then the reflected reading was 1/500th at f8.8. Click Next. Choose the folder again. Choose the next 3 pictures. Click Next. Line the crosses up again. Repeat for the other 2. Those are all pretty close to perfect. Okay, click Next again. It's going to create another tone curve for the ISO 1600 settings. Last time, add light source again. We're going to do for the 3200. And for that, we use 1/500th at f16.1. And the reflected light reading was the same on this one, 16.1 again. Choose the folder again. Last 3 pictures. Click Next. Line the crosses up. repeat for the other two. Click next. It's going to create our tone curve again. Okay, now that we've done all of our ISO settings, this time we're going to click Save. It's going to ask us for a name for the profile. I'm going to name it Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II because that's the camera that we're profiling. Click OK, and it will now show up in our exposure profile list. So now it's time to transfer profiles to the light meter. Now there's two profiles I want to put on the meter. I've got the profile I just created for the EM1 Mark II, so I'll click it, select number 1, because it'll be I want it to be the first profile on the meter. Click the arrows, and there it goes. Now the other one I want is my Pen F profile that I've been using for my other Olympus camera. This is a profile I created about a year ago, and it's still working well, so we'll transfer it to the number 2 position. And then I want to keep the camera default profile on the meter as well, in case I ever have to use the meter with another camera that I haven't profiled. That's like I said, that's the Sekonic default calibration, so we'll make it number 3. Now once we've chosen the ones we want to move to the meter, then we will click Transfer to Light Meter. It asks, do we want to override the profile data in the light meter? Yes, we do. Wait for it to do the transfer. This takes 10-15 seconds. Transfer is complete. And it's done. And I forgot to mention, hooking up the computer to the light meter is done with a USB cable, and the way you do it is you plug the meter into the computer, turn the meter on, and then it'll show up in here. Then once we've got everything transferred over and we're ready to disconnect the meter, the first thing you do is close the Sekonic data transfer software. Once it's closed, then we turn the light meter off using its power button, and then it's safe to unplug it from the computer, and we're all done. You can now start using the profile. This video showed you how to make the profiles. The next video, which is coming soon, is going to show you how to actually use the profiles in the field to take pictures. If you're just using the incident light meter by itself, then it's pretty straightforward. Just go ahead and choose that profile on the meter for the camera you're using and use the incident readings, and you'll get good results. In order to use the dynamic range features, you have to use the spot meter and incident meter in conjunction with each other, and that's kind of a long story of itself, so I'm going to make a separate video on that. So stay tuned for that, and thank you for watching.